Hello, everyone. Welcome to Finstruction Podcast. Here I, Akriti Bajaj, as your host, will take you through the product building journey from the lens of product managers. Today, we have a very esteemed guest speaker, Malti Satish, with us. She's donned hat of a product management lead at various fintech companies like Intuit, Societe Generale, and PayPal. She's now taken up a new challenge of decoding financial literacy for teenagers and young adults. Hi, Malti. So excited to have you on the Instruction podcast today.
Thank you so much, Akriti, for having me here. It is my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. So, for today's topic, I think core payments as a product, we have not deep dive into that much a lot. I think as an industry and otherwise on the podcast itself, I think we've spoken about various other products. But this very basic product, core payments, I think it's super important to understand how this entire fintech industry works. And I think even before we jump to any other product like PNPL or any other that I have done on my podcast, I think this is the super important rail from that perspective. And that's where I wanted to get your thoughts today on how do we build this product, how do we launch it, and what kind of metrics we could use to track the same. So let's get started then. Perfect. So I think before we get started, the basic question that I have is how does payments work? And if you know, you could take an example of maybe card payments for that matter and actually explain us the flow.
Yeah, sure. So I think, just from a very end user perspective, uh, just the pleasure whether I, go to a supermarket and I just use a card, whether I tap it or I kind of swipe it or I, do it as a insert the card. Or these days, of course, more than many of us do more than half of our shopping online. And I think there are very few people who really know that those 3 to 4 seconds, which takes from the card to be swiped or to be tapped, to the time they insert their PIN, there is a lot of things which are happening in the background, which actually makes this transaction happen. So I can probably take a quick snapshot of, what are some of the very broad things that happen, and what are the various entities which are involved. So let's say I go to a supermarket, I have a credit card which has been issued to me by Bank ABC. Okay. Now, typically what happens is that when you go to a offline supermarket, they will usually have what we call as a point of sale. Now,
Yep.
and the person who owns the supermarket, let us, for this conversation, call them as a merchant. Okay. So typically what would happen is that any merchant who wants to be able to order credit cards, debit cards, they need to have this kind of a point of sale. And typically this point of sale, while there are a lot of, private players here, like Sun Labs, like EasyTap, a lot of names that are there in India, they would usually tie up with a bank, which is what we call as an acquirer bank, right? So typically next time when you go to a supermarket, make sure that you look at that point of sale device to say which is that acquirer bank, which is the company which is making that device. So typically what happens is that this merchant who has the point of sale device would have their account, or for the sake of this discussion, they would have a merchant account. So on a daily basis, let's say they are doing 100 transaction worth, let's say 1 lakh rupees. So what would happen is that the money which gets swipe done. At the end of the day, they are expected to have that 1 lakh rupees as an amount in their account, right? As a dayman, if I'm looking at it, that is what they get. Now, how does that interaction happens? So I have a card from Bank ABC, and let's say my merchant has the acquirer bank, which is the bank where they have their merchant account. It's called as Bank XYZ, what the sake of this discussion.
Yep.
Now, my card, which has been issued to me, will usually have some very basic information. It will be a 16-digit card. It will have an expiry date. I will have some kind of credit limit, and I will have some ways of authentication, which could be a PIN number, which could be a, some kind of an authentication. There are a lot of these which have chip cards, so they do not ask for PIN. So whatever is the instructions, that or a CVV number,
In case of online, it's OTP.
OTP, right?
Yep.
So there could be a various amount of authentication. So the first thing that needs to happen, and this is to avoid any kind of fraud, is that the person who is scanning the card is the right person and has the amount of balance remaining. So this needs to be approved. So this particular card that I'm holding, this information, there is something of information which is already there in the card itself, right? Or the chip and something like that. So there is a little bit of amount which is there. The minute I give it to the merchant, he will insert or let's say tap it in the device. Now, at this point of time, what happens? The request from the point of sale device, it goes to the acquirer bank. The acquirer bank will identify the 16-digit numbers are actually also, allocated to the banks and the payment gateways and all of that. So based on that, they will do. So for example, all of you would have seen in your credit card, there is either Visa written or Amex written or MasterCard written. Now, based on the configuration of the credit card 16-digit number, which is the payment gateway. So here a Visa and a Master, you can assume them like a payment network or what we call as payment gateway, who are basically talking to these various entities to ensure that the message is going to the right bank.
Yeah.
From the bank XYZ, the request will go to, let's say, Visa. Then Visa will find out, okay, to which particular bank did I allocate these numbers? So that it will send a message to the bank ABC, to which who had issued the card. So they are called as the card issuers. Now, this whole process is what we call as the authorization process. And during the authorization process is where they will validate that the card which has come in, it is not being a stolen card. It is a valid card. It is not expired. There is a credit limit available to it. So there is a first level of authorization that the bank will do. And once all these checks are clear, it will send it approval, right? The next thing that happens is that if any of these are not, then you will either get a decline or you'll get some kind of a failure. That is what we call as the card authorization failure. Now, when the first level of check happens, you would usually say, let's say you have a chip in the card, you have inserted it. First of all, it takes a little bit of time, maybe like 30 seconds, or maybe that's even more. Maybe I would say 10 seconds for the person to say, okay, let me see when you're able to put the pin. Once they get the first level of approval, they will give the point of sale device to you. Now, at this point of time, you are inserting your pin.
Okay.
But once you have inserted your pin, there is again this entire amount of traffic that goes to the acquirer bank, it goes to the Visa, it goes to the issuer.
Issuer
Will
bank.
check that it is a valid payment, and you have the amount of credit limit and the amount of the authorization times of similarly comes back. Now, at this point of time is where the verification happens, and there is an acknowledgement that it typically, the shopkeeper can decide to give you a copy, and they keep a copy in itself. So typically,
Understood.
all this in a difference of, I would say, 4 to 5 seconds. There is so much of in the back end. There is so much of connectivity. There is so much of exchange of messaging that has happened.
Got it. Got it. No, I think this is super helpful. And, I am coming from the background where I've worked with MasterCard and now I'm working with Pine Labs. So me as a person knows what a network is or a POS terminal is. But for normal people, I think a lot of them do not have this information. And I think it becomes more, it might seem trivial to us, but it's the very basic foundation of how payments work. So this was great.
Thank you. Then I think I just want to kind of talk about, I think what we really need to appreciate is that the number of stops that happen in this transaction and how beautifully these various systems are synchronized to ensure how can we deliver fastest without any issues so that, imagine you're going to a shop and doing an online payment using the QR code. And if it takes anything more than, I would say, 6 to 7 seconds, the user is like, okay, should I make the payment with another app? What has happened with my bank server? Maybe it is down. So,
Yeah.
so there is a humongous amount of effort that goes in making this happen, which usually, is not so very visible.
Makes sense. Completely agreed. I think now that you've actually spoken about what happens on the front end, I also would like to understand what happens on the back end because today I think for us as a consumer, payments end. As soon as I've done the payment, it's successful and the job is done for me. But I think there are still a lot of legs attached to that entire process where the merchant would be getting the money ultimately. So if you could walk us through those processes. And I think there is also some operational sense to it. And it's not just, solely product focused.
So, see, first of all, I want to kind of probably take this answer into three sections. The first section, which I really want to call out, since it's a product forum,
Yeah.
I really want to kind of talk about a few things is that when we talk about the platform, for us, it is all about payments. That means there is a debit happening somewhere, there is a credit happening somewhere. There are a whole lot of partners, depending upon the geography where you are interacting, that needs to be supported, right? So in a typical platform, uh, all the offerings that a payment provider would have, we talked about BNPL, we talked about QR code support, then there's crypto, and then there is a peer-to-peer transfer. There is a merchant online payment, offline payment. Now, in a very regular setup, what happens is that agnostic to all these different offerings, there is a common platform where all these requests are coming. So when you think of a payments platform, and there are a lot of other players, right? You have a risk, you have a compliance, you have a um, authorization server. So a lot of this thing that I talked about. So a lot of these platforms are kind of completely agnostic. Who is making that request? For them, it is a very out of context thing. They don't really care about. It is an incoming request. There has to be a debit somewhere. There has to be a credit somewhere. So that is how we try to decouple it in context of the transaction so that things are much more faster. And it can be very focused on the activity that it has to be. Right? Well, that's what a payment platform, and typically here our product will be the APIs, the microservices, so that we make them so scalable and so robust, so powerful, so that any number of payment methods at any country you are going to add, they can work without making a lot of changes at the platform. Right. So that's from a product perspective. Now, the second part, which I really want to talk about, is that there are a lot of different kind of payments that happens. In India, I think we all are really very bullish about the real-time payments.
Yeah, definitely.
But I really have to say, in many parts of the world today, real-time payments is not really that real-time.
Even though
Right.
they are developed countries.
Though they are developed countries. So there are countries which are at least, I would say, 5 to 10 years. I was very surprised when recently somebody told me that they don't even, most of the point of sale devices actually don't even have the chip card reader.
Oh my God.
It's white. So we have a lot. So anyway, for coming back to this discussion, there are typically what happens is that there is a real time periods and then there is not a so real time periods, right? So if we go back to the example that we were talking about in our last topic, which is about a merchant having a point of sale and there is a number of transactions happening through the way. Now, it doesn't really happen that, that your money comes into your account the day. If many of you have seen, even when you use your credit cards, the amount is not debited out of your credit card on day one, right? It initially says that there is it offsets, but then the whole cycle. So there is a note which is done saying that, okay, this is the issuer from credit card from whose account this has to be debited. This is the person to whose account this has to be credited. So typically what the merchant would do is that end of the day, the bank where their account, the whole list of transactions which are happening, there would usually be a, since we are talking about product, I'm going to be really technical here a little bit, is that there is a bad job that there is. That, kind of legal sense that how many transactions happen today, which were the issuer facts. But at this point of time when the transactions happen, all the relevant parties have the context that there was a transaction
Done.
right? There was an approval that was given. The Visa card has kind of given an approval saying that this is happening. So there is a reconciliation that happens between the payment gateway and the acquirer. There is a reconciliation that happens between the issuer and the payment gateway. And in between all of this, you have something called as a processing fees. Every single party will have their own stake of, some kind of a fees over there. Eventually, a customer who owns the credit card has to pay and probably the merchant has to pay some fees for point of sale device. So what happens is that end of the day, there is something called what we call as a settling happens. Now, this settlement is the one which actually says that during the day, so many transactions happen. So many of them were authorized. So many of them were failed. And so there is a end of the day batch, or sometimes it even takes more than 2 to 3 days, where there will be a complete reconciliation in what we call as a settlement process. And that is when actually the money movement happens between the issuer account with the the person who has to receive the merchant will receive the amount. And that is the reason also sometimes you try to make a payment, the amount gets debited from your account, and you try again, you call up the bank and the bank will say, give us 2-3 days time, the amount will come back, reflect back in your account, right? For any agreed failed transactions, right? So
Yeah.
that is what we call as the settlement process. So in the back end, when you look at it, while the payment platforms are kind of honoring these real-time payments, offline payments, end of the day, there are a lot of jobs that must to run, which because these platforms are in literally, I could say in the middle. There are already a bit of upstream systems which will be there. There are the downstream systems which are there. And then there is a whole ecosystem of your partners, like your acquiring bank is there, your issuer bank is there. There could be other payment systems which are kind of third-party payment systems which are in the in the picture, depending upon the region where you're operating and the capability that you need. Right. So there are a lot of data. There is a lot of operations to ensure for any failed transactions or any transactions that did not do it. Or if there are any gaps because of the system time lag, any of the systems were down, so any of the jobs that were stuck. So typically what happens is that in a payments platform, beyond the engineering team and the product team which is involved, there is always a huge support that we get from our operations team and from the data team. And as I said, there is also an impact on your financial accounting because there is some amount of accounts receivable, there is accounts payable, because you're kind of constantly moving the money from one party.
Yeah, makes sense. No, I think, yeah, this is super great, like understanding it from the entire life cycle perspective and not just, that I have made the payment and it's done. So I think seeing that other side of the things as well, what's actually going behind, okay, your payment is being done in those 3-4 seconds, but there is a whole process happening after that, which needs to be done.
See, money is a very sensitive thing, right? For somebody, 1,000 rupees is to pay. For somebody else, 1 lakh is to pay, right? But money is money. And as a payment organization or as a payment product, it is very, very important that every single rupee or every single unit of money that the payment platform is honoring is accounted for. And that is why it becomes super critical in terms of accuracy, in terms of tracking what went wrong and tracking it to the last unit.
Got it. Got it. No, I think this is super insightful. I think I was, since you mentioned this point, right? There are a lot of different countries that you would have to deal with in case it's a global payments platform. And of course, every country has its different needs or different payment methods. How do you make sure that, it's customizable to suit every country's needs, but at the same time keeping it very standardized? Because I'm sure, like, the backend can't be changed every time a new payment method is being added.
So typically, I mean, this goes like a very standard, like a feature request that would have. Of course, when let's say a particular payment company is expanding into a new geography, and given that this is kind of a regulated setup, there is a lot of rigor around making sure that things go right, making sure that all the guidance from a regulatory perspective and from a compliance perspective of that particular country, or let's say whatever payment method that has to be supported, all these things are completely unpacked before you even go into implementing anything. So typically, when a particular payment method on a particular payment gateway expands to a new country, it actually starts like a very standard product development where there is a requirement base. But here, not only the product team, but your compliance team, your legal team, your regulatory teams also have, and your finance teams also have to be involved here to make sure there are no glitches, there are everything. So, for example, RuPay is supported on behavior, right? I mean, that as a card, we support.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if somebody wants to make a international payment using the RuPay card, right?
Yeah.
So think of M-Pesa. M-Pesa is widely used in Africa, but not so widely used anywhere else.
Yeah.
Right. So similarly, there would be very many examples you can find where they would have certain local payment methods which are not supported outside the country. And any payment organization can become really successful if they support that local payment method.
Exactly.
Even that is the only way you can acquire your business. So
True.
there could be usually be a lot of unpacking. So this goes to a lot of due diligence where the requirements are completely thrashed out by the front end teams because if the payment method has to be supported, it is not just showing it as a, I'm just referring to the online payment method for this example. It is not a matter of just showing it in my app up to the last few. Because see, think of it, I'm just kind of adding a little bit more complexity here in the first question that you asked, that how does a payment life cycle look like, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you think of it, in a payment life cycle, there are two parts. One is what we call as a forward money movement. That means I went to the shop, I or let's take the example of an online payment. I made the payment through my card. It went through. Everything is hunky dory. Everything is fine. Now the product that I bought, I'm not very happy with that. Now at
Yeah.
this point of time, I want my money refunded.
Yeah.
Now this is where you will have what we call as a
Reverse journey. Yeah.
so all kind of things like a chargeback or a refund or a reversing the transaction fees or whatever it is, right? So there is a lot that goes along what can be done if this particular transaction amount has to be reversed. What happens to the transaction fees? What happens to the original fees, right?
Yeah.
So when we are going into a new country, you have to think through all these different things
Understood.
and what all are the legs that you're going to support. So there is a lot of due diligence that goes in the front end in terms of all the platform layers that are going to be hit by this. What is the kind of operation support that is needed to be done for this? What are the metrics that needs to be monitored in order to do this? So there is,
Yeah.
it's like a very typical product development that we do. But yes, there is a lot more rigor given this is going to be in a regulated domain.
Got it. Got it. Understood. And I also wanted to understand, before launching any payment method, do you make sure that it's tested with some users and then actually launched in the market just to, to get feedback and understand where the gaps are, if there are any?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, just like how we would do with any product, when you try to do with a, soft launch or you do a beta test or you will do a MPP launch and all that. Similarly, for any kind of these rollouts that we would do, we would have a very standard rollout. We would do a lot of experiments in order to see the user experience. Because imagine if you're rolling out into a new country or a new region and you expect, let's say, 2 billion transactions happening every month or in a week. Yes, then your backend system needs to be beefed up. Imagine you're going to go for a billion day, what do you call it, billion big billion sales or
Yeah.
big billion day or things like that. And you know that every day I'm having 1 lakh transaction, but on those 3 days, I'm going to have probably 3 lakh transactions per day. And if your backend systems, especially the platform systems, are not tested, rigored for these kind of things, then it will be a flop. Right?
Got it.
So,
Got it.
so it is really important to run the entire transactions through the pipeline to make sure that before we roll this out to our entire country user, there is a very, very caution standard rollout that.
Got it. Got it. Understood. And you mentioned, right, like in case of big billion days. So I just wanted to understand, of course, any payment platform starts from zero, but at the end of the day, the idea is to scale it up as much as possible. So how do you make sure that, at a time when it's being scaled up, there is no downtime as well? Because I'm sure, if there's a downtime, then the customer is never coming back. So how do you make sure that you strike the right balance between the two.
Right. Now, again, just like how we spoke about in the last question, this is not like a one-time effort.
Yeah.
This is something that, gradually scaled up and built. So if I know that there is a big billion sale coming up, there is a forecast, there is a projection that what happens on that. So typically, when we are scaling up our systems, there are some really key parameters, right? In terms of your latency, how much time is acceptable? What is the benchmark in the industry for somebody considering to take?
Okay.
What is the kind of failure levels which are acceptable? Let's say 99.9% of our transactions have to go through without failures, right?
Understood.
What is the kind of high availability? How fast can we switch our systems up to be able to, how secure it is? Because it shouldn't happen just because they're doing so many transactions, we can't slip through the security of the system. So typically,
Completely agree.
load testing, security, latency. So it's not only about taking that volume of transactions, but holistically looking at that my platform has to perform similar whether I'm doing 1 lakh transactions per day or if I'm doing 20 lakh transactions. So
Completely.
as a platform, uh, what any platform would have is what they call as an operational metrics. And these are very, very rigorous metrics for any platform to make sure that they are striving for the highest optimization and highest performance and on a very regular basis. So there are usually, a lot of rigor which is put in under these buckets of reliability, performance, latency, to be able to gauging up for that big day. But the preparation starts much, much ahead in advance.
Understood. Understood. And in case of a downtime, do you also make sure, like, let's say there is an acquiring bank. So does the payment platforms make sure that they have multiple acquiring banks so that, if one is down, then we reach out to the other just to make sure that transaction still goes through. And similarly, in case of networks as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just like how you would always have a backup for anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any payment setup, you always have multiple routes through which they can ensure that. See, for us, and I would say for any payment company,
Yeah.
making sure that the transaction goes through is the way to earn the revenue, right?
Agreed.
So it is not only important for the customer and the merchant, it is important for the payment organization also that they see success in every single transaction that is going through their systems,
Makes
right?
sense.
So for that, the payment platform needs to do everything, whether it is multiple partners, making sure that there are systems in place that would send out the notification, or systems which could detect patterns to say there might be an issue which is coming, or this particular server is loaded more, so I may have to switch to the other partner.
Understood.
And these are very strategic relationships between the payment organization as well as their partners as well. Because if one particular partner is not doing well, they are constantly, the authorizations are failing,
Feeling.
then they are not in game anymore. So they
Agree.
also are, a very important party to this whole setup. So everybody is very, very competitive about it in this life cycle.
Understood, understood. And I think, yeah, these are very important points because I think everyone thinks about building products, but there are no, I haven't seen anyone talking about, okay, how do we take care of if there is a failure? Or like if we are building an API, okay, we've built out an API, but are we making sure that if the API is failing a lot of times, are we getting any alerts for that? So I think taking care of those edge cases are super important from that standpoint of view to make sure it's successful.
Quality is like, super superlative operational metric for any class.
Got it. Got it. And I think that brings to my last question. I wanted to understand what exactly are the success metrics for any payments platform, be it online or offline. What kind of metrics would you be tracking to make sure,
See,
it's
I mean,
living up?
it is, this is something that would vary depending upon the game, but if I have to really just talk about the payments platform, as I said, it has to be, uh, you know, just the operational metrics, if I talk about reliability, latency, availability, quality, these are some of the very, very critical, right? For example, if a particular system is down, how fast are you able to react? What is your mean time to address that issue, right? Imagine in the end of the day, your settlements, transaction reconciliations are going on, you're exchanging the data with your partners and the jobs fail. How quickly are you able to identify those? So it is really important for a platform to have these kind of operational maintenance. Now,
Understood.
the other part I would also say is that any product organization remains as competitive as they are quickly able to adapt with the changing macro conditions, infrastructure, technology, innovations. Right? So there is a huge opportunity of innovation over there. That how fast can you do things? How fast can you detect the issues? How fast can you respond to the downtime? So there is a lot of engineering innovation which is possible out here. So,
Okay.
so I would say that, you know, uh, if you are onboarding a new offering, let's say PNPL in a new country, let's say crypto, one particular country legalized crypto, for example, how fast can you be the first, can you have the first mover advantage of enabling crypto for the merchants and the customers there? So a platform has to be able to support those front-end teams to make sure that the time to market is fast. So that is why making it highly configurable, making sure that it doesn't require a lot of context to be able to add a new payment method or a new condition.
Yeah.
That is what talks about the agility or quick onboarding of a new product offering onto a platform. Are some of the very critical aspects, apart from all the other operational metrics that I talked about.
Understood. I think yeah, this is a very interesting perspective, talking about metrics from the business point of view as well. It's not just that, okay, your platform is working fine, but it's also making sure it's continuously innovating, getting on the best payment methods that are available in the market as fast as possible. Thanks for this fresh insight on this one.
In fact, there is a whole market out there, which is just building tools like real-time transaction monitoring, the whole agility part that I talked about.
Yeah.
And many payment organizations end up building their own tools and dashboards based on their setup. But there are a lot of off-the-shelf products because, as I said, this can directly hit your top line. Agree, right? And because and as well as your bottom line, because your operations team need to be able to respond quickly to the needs of the market, the challenges that every platform is in.
Understood. Understood. I think, yeah, then I am done with my questions. I just have a surprise question for you towards the end, which is any advice that you have for current or aspiring PM? Any one advice that you'd like to give?
Okay, so I think I would just want to say that since we're talking about payments, it's a very, very exciting space. And
Yeah.
especially the PMs who aspire to get into the fintech or the fintech or the payment space, I would say that just stay curious. There are tons and tons of problems around you, whether you are on a platform, whether you are on a front end. There is always a bunch of problems that you can solve. So I would say just keep your curiosity high and look for how you can contribute in terms of building products and solve these problems. So I think staying curious and staying very customer focused are very key elements, and they are not as easy as being said. So that would be an advice I would have for the aspiring PMs.
No, I think I have heard this time and again from everyone. Staying curious is very important because then only you will be able to solve problems of your customers. If you're constantly thinking about what can I do more, if you think, oh, I have launched the product and my job is done, I think that's where it dies. So I think, yeah, that's definitely important, I would say. Thank you so much, Malti, for sharing your wisdom on payments. I think this was great. We really understood payments from the inside as well as from the outside as to what happens. And I'm sure it would prove very useful for everyone.
I'm really glad. And this is definitely a very exciting space. And there's a lot of innovation that a product manager can add value to it. So, yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Thank you, Akriti, for having me here.
Thank you so much, Malti.